Welcome back to another episode of Void City Customs. I am Dan, and we are going to be looking at something special today. So, as some of you might know, it's coming up on the 30th anniversary of the death of Superman in the comics. So this is like the first time Superman ever was defeated in battle, and that would be by Doomsday. And that was in Superman number 75 from January of 1993. However, I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, it came out a little bit earlier than that. So we might be closer to that 30th anniversary of the death of Superman than everyone remembers. I've already done videos for Doomsday and Superman from that issue of Superman, number 75 from 1993, or possibly earlier, and those will be linked up above most likely. Either way, there were 4 other characters that get introduced shortly after the death of Superman that I thought deserved action figures as well in the McFarlane DC multiverse scale and style, I guess you would call it. Those would be 4 characters that showed up in the Adventures of Superman number 500, and that was from June of 93. That would of course be the 4 new Supermen that showed up. Steel, the Eradicator, Superboy, and the Cyborg Superman. We can get into a little bit more details about each of them as we look at each of those figures. I'm going to look at one of them per video, and we're going to show them in the order that they appeared in Adventures of Superman number 500. So today, we are going to look at the Cyborg Superman. Now, obviously, they kind of saved this guy until the end. Once you got to know him a bit better, you might know why. He was definitely the darkest looking of all of the new Supermen, with his Terminator face and his blown apart body with robot parts everywhere. That said, I still thought he looked pretty awesome, and the part of his face that you could see, at least at first, looked like Superman. So you're thinking, well, maybe it could be him. Obviously, you find out pretty quickly it's probably not this guy. This guy's got some things going on behind the scenes, and some of the accessories I made for him will illustrate some of those things he had going on. Either way, let's jump right in and take a look at the Cyborg Superman up close. Here he is, the man of tomorrow himself, Cyborg Superman, aka some guy named Hank Henshaw. He first showed up in the Adventures of Superman number 500, and then had his first solo outing, which then is where his story continued, in Superman number 78 in 1993, where he promptly storms into the Cadmus Project and steals Doomsday's body, attaches it to a big rock with a bunch of chains and ropes and stuff, and then just throws it into space so that he can be someone else's problem because he's very much still alive. Anyway, the Cyborg Superman, just some dude named Hank Henshaw, floating around in space for whatever reason. May have been a test pilot, may have been some kind of accident. It varies over time. Came in contact with some Kryptonian technology somehow, floating around Earth, and it gave him half Superman's DNA somehow, and half Kryptonian technology cyborg body for the rest of him. That all looks like Superman. So he comes back to Earth, pretending to be Superman, fools everybody, and then does some really bad stuff. But I won't get into that right now necessarily. That being said, Cyborg Superman had some transformations, which I'll get into later on with some of his accessories here. But let's take a look at what went into this guy, because there are a couple of different things that went into making this guy, and one of them is not a McFarlane figure. So that was kind of interesting. Let's get into it. So let's break down the recipe for what you will need if you want to make this particular McFarlane DC Multiverse Cyborg Superman action figure. As mentioned, you will need 4 different figures to complete this build. One of them is not a McFarlane Toys action figure. Now, to start with, most of the body is basically the Action Comics 1000 Superman body. However, this copy I got from the 2-pack that comes with Devastator. I had previously used his head for Eradicator, and I had the body just left over, so that's the one I chose to use for the Cyborg Superman. One thing I really wanted to make sure I did when I made all 4 of these figures is have there be a noticeable difference between all the figures. I didn't want them all to be just the same Superman figure painted differently, other than steel, obviously. So that's part of why I went with all different body shapes and figures for all these guys. So like I said, that was the Action Comics 1000 Superman body and cape, and also the left arm there and the right leg. Next, you will need a Justice League 2021 Cyborg figure from McFarlane Toys, and from that I used portion of the left leg, basically from the mid-thigh down. And you will also need both arms from the cyborg figure because you will need both of them to put together this right arm for Superman. Next, you will need an infected Superman figure, and from that you will need the head. I used the top right portion of his head and spliced it together with the next figure, which is the head from a T-800 action figure. This again is from the company NECA, and they made some 7-inch scale endoskeletons from the Terminator movies. This one is from Terminator 2, but I just used the head, and we will get into the surgery that was involved there as well. So, for my cyborg Superman, ever since I was a little kid, even though I had never seen the movie Terminator yet at 9 years old, I knew that this guy looked like a Terminator, at least in the face. I knew he had a nose, which Terminators don't have, but other than that, and the big red Christmas light in his chin, he was a Terminator, let's face it. So I knew for the head for this guy, I needed to use a Terminator head. I looked on eBay and I actually waited until I found a loose, old school 7-inch scale T-800 endoskeleton figure. But it turned out not to be loose. It did come in a box, but the box was like smashed to oblivion. I was actually surprised that the figure inside was intact. Not that it mattered. I just cut his head right off and cut a chunk out of the side of it. But that's pretty much essentially what it is. I pulled this Terminator's head off and I just cut like 25% out of it, just right out of the side there. And then I did the opposite with the head of a Superman figure. This is the infected Superman. I used him because I liked the dark around his eyes. I thought it was appropriate for this version of Superman, given how he turns out. I did paint a pupil in there because he did have a pupil in that eye, and the infected Superman figure does not have a pupil there. So that was added in there. Otherwise, I didn't really alter the head much at all. The nose is also still from that Superman. I just painted it silver. Cyborg Superman does have a nose, which is the only thing that really sets him apart from really looking like a Terminator, other than the LED light in his chin. Now that is a real LED, as you can see kind of underneath there, it's poking through. It doesn't light up or anything anymore, but that was another piece that came from my remote control for the Christmas lights that I got the antenna from to make the handle for Steel's hammer. Well, this little red light was also in there, so I just pulled that out of there and stuck it in his chin because I thought it worked perfectly. And it is see-through, so sometimes light can shine through there and it just looks like it's kind of lit up. It's pretty nice, but it adds to that effect of finishing how his face looked. Speaking of the Superman figure, that is where most of the body comes from. This is from an Action Comics 1000 Superman body. Now that is this whole leg, the top of this leg, the waist, the whole torso, and this arm, as well as the neck and the cape. And he's just painted here, and I did carve out the midsection a little bit to make it more shaped like the cybernetic side where parts were missing. And I did carve out parts of the chest here to make the lines a bit different and make them look more like machined parts. Painted those silver, painted this part silver, reassembled them, carved all that out using my X-Acto blade again, did it all by hand, just whittled it out of there. The arm and the bottom of the leg come from Justice League McFarlane movie figure Cyborg. Now, I did have to do a pretty crazy surgery in his armpit here. The peg swivel joint that attaches the arms into the torso was not long enough on Cyborg to get into Superman here, so I had to use the one that came on Superman's arm. However, that meant I had to remove it from Superman's arm and insert it into Cyborg's arm. Anyone who's tried to do that before knows that these little joints, there is a plastic piece that goes in through there so that it can revolve, and it goes all the way through. So you actually have to cut in there very carefully after heating these things up so they're pliable, using an X-Acto blade, and cut through the bar so that you can remove the one shoulder point and put the other one back in there. Now I only remove the middle of the bar because I stretch it open first, so that way when I close it again, there is still the outside edge of each bar holding the arm in place, so it's not going to pop off there. It's absolutely fine. Another thing to note, this arm is on Superman's right arm, but this is Cyborg's left arm. The reason I did that is because Cyborg's left arm on the action figure has a replaceable forearm that turns into a plasma cannon, and I wanted that because Cyborg Superman has an arm that turns into a plasma cannon and is used for some very despicable things later on in his own story. But either way, I needed his arm to be able to transform, so I just removed the hand from the right arm and put it on the left arm's forearm, which I then switched out and put onto the bicep. So that way I can switch it out. And when you switch it out, it ends up looking like that. So then he's got his awesome cannon arm to put on there, and that's pretty cool. So you can actually reenact that part of the story if you want, where he lets the Eradicator know how he really feels about him. His leg was a complicated surgery because, as I mentioned, that is part cyborg leg, part Superman leg. There is no joint there halfway down the thigh, so I actually did just saw his leg off, just flat across, and I drilled 3 holes up into the thigh. I did the same thing on Cyborg's leg after I lined them up so they'd be the right length, because his leg is a bit longer than Superman's actually. After lining them up so that they do line up and he does stand level, I drilled 3 holes into his leg as well, and then using the leftover pin parts of the small picture frame pins I always use in these figures, and then I just used those to bridge the gap in between here, and then with some Gorilla Glue and some paint, sealed those together. So now it kind of looks like his leg goes straight into this Cyborg leg. I have seen some people do this custom before where they just straight up use Cyborg's leg all the way up into there. Well, not only is that not accurate because the leg does start mid-thigh, Cyborg's leg, as I mentioned, is longer, so then he ends up standing kind of like that, and it always looks sort of weird. I painted the emblem on the chest so that half of it is black and yellow, which is how he looked in the comics. Again, the silver and the black paint that I used here were my Vallejo model paints, acrylics, that work really well on this plastic, adhered well, dried well, didn't stay tacky, and they're my go-to paints. And so there you go. That's kind of how I put this guy together and made the Cyborg Superman. He completed and rounded out my Reign of the Supermen set, and I was very happy to finish this guy so I could get all 4 of them in the display case with Doomsday and Superman. Either way, let me know what you guys think of this guy and of all my Reign of Supermen figures. That's the 4th one right here, so that completes the whole series. So all 4 of them are available now to watch on our channel. I enjoyed making these guys, even though it took a little while, and I am now glad that I got to share them with you. Here he is, Terminator Cyborg Superman. Well, that has been it for today's episode of Void City Customs. Thanks for watching again. Remember to like and subscribe, ring that bell so that you can make sure to see all the next videos when they come out. I'm gonna try to get more custom videos up despite having this whole moving fiasco still ongoing. Still gotta get that content out there, and I wanna move on to new projects. Me and Toast both. So look for more content both from him and from me in the near future, but keep it here. I am Dan. Thank you for watching this series, and as always, I will see you next time.